So what I want to do is just um, for those who have this perspective on safety culture, um, one question, interesting question is, are there differences between small and large mines in terms of how to create and maintain a positive safety culture? Any in the panel can answer this question. Anyone?
With the right leadership, I think it's easier in a small mine environment to create a positive, consistent, strong culture simply because of the volume and the demographics. But that assumes that you've got the right leadership.
You may use this. I hope it
Everybody heard that?
Go ahead.
No?
Try it again.
Is that should be turned on?
Buy low, sell high. From my perspective, if you are a small operator and you have good leadership, enlightened leadership, it's easier and more expeditious to establish a strong, positive culture than it is with a large organization, simply because of resources and the demographic element. But that assumes that enlightened leadership who's going to have to carry a lot of that load, because there isn't layers of resources for them to rely on to cascade it through the organization.
I think the downside, though, is I agree with what Tom said. I think the risk is that in smaller operations, a lot of it is personality driven by that individual, and when he leaves the organization, will you have a system or embedded deep enough that it stays with the new leader who comes in, and will you go 180 degrees to whatever culture he wants to run? Whereas in a larger organization, it's much more difficult for one person to change that big battleship's direction negatively, obviously. I mean positively, but it also is negatively once you've got a culture in place. Just my view. Anybody else?
Anybody else wants to comment on it? Anybody with small operations? Yeah, go ahead, go on.
Agree.
My role in my safety training deals with a lot of different cultures. I work with companies as big as DuPont, and again with very small 4 or 5 man operations. And while I agree, I think the pitfalls are universal. No matter what the size of the company is, there's things that work and there's things that don't work. My experience has shown me that you're absolutely right, John, in that there are personalities that tend to drive a lot of these companies. And once they're convinced that they're right, and what my limited presentation tried to get across was that if you feel you're successful, your measurement is, for example, injuries or compliance or any of the other things we talked about, and you've hit some success bar, it's going to be very hard to turn that ship into a different direction. So I totally agree. Yet there are some very small companies out there that are excellent at what they do, because there's not a lot of layers, there's not a lot of baggage, and when the boss says we turn right, everybody turns right. So there are those advantages, but there's also disadvantages.
I had one other comment was, when you have a large facility, you usually, when you're using those lagging indicators, you have typically something there. But if you have a very small operation, say as a hot mix asphalt plant or a ready mix concrete facility, those are 2 and 3 people operations. You can go for years being lucky. So that's where you could see a difference between those large operations. They may have had over time incidents that you're reacting to when you're dealing with those lagging indicators. Small operations, you can go for years with being lucky.
Thank you. Another question for the panel, and the question is it possible to manage a culture-based safety program without having a full-time safety professional?
just say one thing. I think that's the goal. The goal is to have no safety professional, but everyone is a safety professional. Your operations are safety professionals.
I was just gonna say, if, as a safety professional, my goal is to have at least one.
And that one is me. I think if you look at companies that are held up as having consistently good, positive, strong cultures and performance to match the big folks, DuPont, Dow, you'll find very high ratios of HSE professionals to head count in the order of 1 to 300, 500 to 1,000. Whereas others, you'll be far more dense. I think that in some ways it's almost better that you don't have them there, because that means that you have full integration, whether forced or voluntary, through management to make this stuff happen. As long as they know what they're doing, it's almost faster that way.
Yeah, I think you need resources, but I agree with some of the others. You have to ingrain the safety process in the people that are operating the operation. What you do need, I think, however, are people that understand process, understand systems, understand change. They may not be your traditional safety professional, but there are people that understand the organization and how to move it forward.
Thank you. Let me ask this question to Tony first, and then the general question is to the panel. To Tony, the question is there a reward structure associated with the safety culture program at your company? If so, what is it? Okay. And the question to the panel is it possible to manage, do incentive programs, monetary or prizes, help or hinder building a safety culture? So, question first to you, does your company have a program?
We have several that reward safety performance, and they're very much on par with the way we reward production performance. At the mine levels, there are monetary awards and less intrinsic awards that are given for performance, the recognition awards. Within the overall organization, there are incentive programs for senior management within the corporation as well as management at the mine site that reward safety. Most of those are still based upon traditional measures, and that's the shortcoming. I think one of the earlier commenters talked about that fact, and I think one of the things that we've discussed internally at Arch is how you start to move that reward structure away from rewarding injury-free performance to where it's rewarding other upstream measures such as near-miss reporting, observations that are conducted, to where you're trying to move the reward structure to where it's dealing with indicators that are more predictive of safety performance. But at this point, Arch, I think similar to many other companies, would have a very difficult time taking that structure away because it's seen as an entitlement.
Okay, go ahead. The panel.
Yes.
No, nobody wants to answer the question in the panel?
You have to you remember I was a student, I have to be repeated a couple times. What was the question?
The question is really, do incentive programs help or hinder building a safety culture? That's the general question.
That's a tough one, because I was just, that's why I was kibitzing over here saying that the point was made in the previous presentation that you can't, it's hard to take those things back, and they're already embedded in every alpha property, some type of monetary reward for the standard stuff. No, some as basic as you yourself didn't have an accident, to as your group, or to whatever. Our senior managers, all the way up to the CEO, has a fairly significant piece of his bonuses tied to safety performance based on, as Tony said, TRIR rates and all that type of thing. And I think the comment was made, rightly so, when you start trying to change those, it's awfully hard for people to not believe they're being monetarily punished for success or monetarily punished for some reason. That's going to be awfully hard. If you have never started one, don't start it, but if you're like the rest of us, they're embedded everywhere.
Just wanted to repeat what I said. They're an effective way to go to raise awareness. They're, you know, if you want to move an organization from bad to average, it certainly is a way to get everybody's attention. We have safety performance as part of an overall manager rating system, so that you know, I have goals every year. You know, there's a safety score, and there's you know, there's certainly, you know, targets in there that I'm supposed to meet or exceed. But we don't tie that to a standalone bonus performance. You know, it's not tied to a you know, there's not a safety score or a safety bonus that's unrelated to other things. And I think it is easier to manage and administer, and it makes a little more sense the higher up in the organization you go with it. When you're managing 50,000 hours a year, there's going to be a lot of random things to it. If you're a manager whose process encompasses 2 million hours a year, then that number is going to be a lot more solid. Sorry. Good.
Yeah, just a quick observation on the value of providing monetary awards for trailing indicators. I think everybody, sounds like we've got consensus that if you can avoid it, you really should. And it's hard as heck to get it back if it's already viewed as an entitlement. If you want to test that, whether you use NIOSH or somebody else, just ask your employees, confidential, blank piece of paper, are injuries underreported at this site? If they are, how many or what percentage do you think that is per month? No names, fold it up, put it in an envelope, and have them turn it in. And you'll find out very quickly, very cheaply, whether or not you have a real problem with that.
One other.
Tony?
Yeah, I think the big concern is whether or not you're getting underreporting, and Arch does a couple things to make sure that that's as accurate as it can be. One thing is we conduct audits of the operations to make sure that their accident reporting is accurate. And secondly, quite interestingly, the corporate safety group, which is the keeper of the numbers, doesn't get rewarded for safety performance. So I think having that as a fail-safe in there has helped to keep our process as honest as it can be.
Question for Karen is, Karen, you know, your study is still underway and you have done only 3 mines. That you have done an analysis on where a particular mine is with regard to, say, safety culture, where the mine stands on a number of issues. Are you proposing to make recommendations how that mine can improve safety culture?
As part of this project, we leave the mine with a report of the areas that they need to improve on, and we do try to give them some sort of recommendation. We don't like to tell them what areas they're failing at and then just walk away and say, see you. But unfortunately, we do not have a funded project right now to develop interventions to address these. You know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I would like to think that a future NIOSH funded project would be to develop some sort of intervention project.
I suspect that even if you recommend anything in terms of what the mine should do, that may be more of an informal recommendation rather than a formal recommendation from NIOSH, right?
Correct. It is just an informal recommendation from the assessment team.
One other question for you on the assessment methodology that you presented. Are all methods weighted equally?
All methods, we don't weight them. We use them to sort of figure out why we're seeing results that we're seeing. So we conduct the survey, and we can survey the most number of people, so we can give almost everyone in the mine a voice. But that gives us numbers, and we get those scales and those bars that we see. So we see, oh, guess what, communication is low. Then we go to the interviews and we go to the bars that we conducted to figure out why we're getting lower numbers in some areas. And then that's how we can give the best picture back to the mind of what their status is, why they might be seeing that status, and we can actually, that's where we get our recommendations from. A lot of our recommendations that we give to the mind come directly from the employees in the interviews.
Kyle, I had a question for you. Often training implies teaching people some skills or providing some knowledge. It is said that training should focus on facilitating learning, enable lifelong learning by the individual himself. So what are some of the ways in which an organization can make training more of a learning tool rather than a teaching tool? And what are some of the metrics to assess whether you are a learning organization?
Okay, so that's a big question with a couple of parts. I'll start with the last one about the learning organization. I actually looked for metrics that people are using to assess learning organizations, and I wasn't really satisfied with anything that I found. There was one 2-part article about how to do it, but it really, I don't think it would have satisfied anyone in the room as far as here's how you really do that. I think it's important to remember a couple of things, and then I will propose a way to assess the learning organization. First, one thing is to remember that the purpose of assessing whether your organization is increasingly becoming a learning organization, the purpose for that is different, and the stakes are different. So in assessment, you can use different approaches if it's a low stakes kind of situation as opposed to high stakes. So when you walk in and you're evaluating mines and you're issuing fines and penalties and stop work orders and things like that, that's high stakes stuff. And you need to be able to really measure and quantify and know with confidence that your measures are accurate. Well, learning is not something that is visible. So in a way, you can look at the outputs of whether somebody learned something, and you can look at knowledge, and you can look at skills, and you should, by the way, evaluate the training part. But as far as whether your organization is becoming the kind of place where ideas are freely being shared and where trust is emerging and where people are generating new ideas, I think you have to do more, and it's not dissimilar to the bars and some of the other tools that were just discussed, that Karen discussed. But you have to realize that you will be imprecise. So metrics is a word that sounds very precise, and measurement is very precise. We're not going to be precise. But we can, if you realize that the purpose is to improve the performance, and you can live with the fact that, I might develop a rubric. She had a 5-point scale for the bars, and I might say it's a 4 when really it's a 3. But as long as the stakes aren't really high, that's okay, because it gets us talking about, well, is it a 4 or is it a 3? And then you talk about what it should be. So you would look at things like teamwork, or even conversation, or so in teamwork, when we measure that in schools, we look for things like people rephrasing what someone else just said and following up on an idea they just heard, and eye contact, and apparent interest, and motivation, support for other people's ideas, the ability to discard an idea rather than ride a dead horse, things like that. So you can create a rubric, which is kind of like the bars thing is for a scale in 5 parts. You can take a complex concept like teamwork or conversation, and you can, or productive collaborative conversation or collaboration or whatever you want to call it. You can identify elements of it, as she did with the bars, and you can create different numbers of descriptors. You don't always, a lot of people make a mistake of locking into 4 levels or 5 levels or something, and then everything has to be done in 5 levels, and that way that leads you into some unrealistic categories, because some things are just yes, no, and some things really do have multiple discrete levels, and if you don't get it right, then you're going to have a lot of ambiguity. But tolerating that ambiguity and creating discussions around this is really productive. So in the end, you can't necessarily quantitatively, and you wouldn't want to tie monetary bonuses to my organization moving from a 3.5 to a 4.1, but you want to say, hey, are we seeing more of this? And, just having those conversations around those characteristics and having everybody develop a shared understanding of what I'm looking for when I'm looking for teamwork is really powerful. So, I think you can actually measure the learning part. And I'm going back to the first part of the question. You can measure that through tests, as far as knowledge acquisition, through performance in terms of skills, with observations, and again, rubrics or tools to watch someone performing a skill. And you should. So knowledge and skills, training is still important. Then there's this other part where you become an organization. And one thing you might consider doing, which is something that Michael Fullen did recommend, is even track the ideas that are produced. If you're a learning community, you should be generating ideas. So you might want to log, in an unofficial, logbook or something. Hey, we had these meetings, not just how many meetings and who attended and how long were they. And you may or may not want to do that for something like learning community. But just have a place where, what are some of the, end every meeting with what are some of the good ideas that came out of this meeting? And at first you might end up going, I don't know, did we come up with any new good ideas? But do that over a series of months, and you'll find that you're starting to end up with lists of ideas that were generated and people who are going to pick up on them, and you'll see some progress. Another thing to just mention is videotape some of those things and let people look at themselves. I remember I did a management training thing. I used to think I was a very democratic leader, and we all thought about this together, and I saw myself on tape, and it wasn't so. So I think you can use some technology for that too. Did you want anybody else to think about that?
Anybody else want to?
Just a
take that?
quick comment around the issue of performance, and looks like we got a red light now. Can you hear me?
I think a battery may have.
Oh, well, we ran it down. The issue was performance measurement of training, and I think in this country the standard of care we generally have is I've got curriculum, I delivered curriculum, I can sign off that the person was sitting in the seat when I delivered curriculum. If we could simply move it to the point where we provided a verification of competency for people who go through training, I think it would make a huge difference in terms of what we'd get on the other side, especially retention. And if you can build it into job descriptions, that as an employee you're required to, you name it, 50%, 75% retention. So instead of me teaching you lockout and tag out, you need to show me that you know lockout and tag out to a standard we defined internally. I think you would have a huge impact on our industry. Anybody disagree?
No,
Let's go do it.
Question for both Tony and John here, and that has to do with the merger of Alpha and Massey. And in Tony's case, I guess, with the International Core Group, how do we go about trying to bring these new organizations to the existing culture, or develop some appreciation of the culture and see how this can be integrated or developed in more positive ways?
Well, I'll take the first shot since I'm 15 days ahead of Tony.
That's a world of difference.
What we've done is we've had numerous integration meetings with splitting out functional groups and operational groups, putting the teams together, putting the business units together, and characteristically of an organization where both organizations are basically the same size. Thank you. Basically the same size. An inordinate number of people are in the same positions they were, with just a different T-shirt on now that says Alpha instead of Massey. So we have that. We recognize that it's not a matter of saying we're going to replace these people and bring another group of people in. So with that, we have implemented a series of, I spoke about running right, our leading culture in our, I guess, our trademark culture phrase. Every employee, all the managers from, starting with the presidents of Alpha's direct reports, all the senior VPs and all their reports down to general manager level, all the general managers down to the shift foreman type levels have all gone to 2 or 3, depending on where you set, 1, 2, 3, maybe at least 3 of those classes already. And one of the things I didn't say is the first half of that program is to discuss just general culture. How do you make a culture? How do you, what is a servant culture? How do you get people, your employees, to think of you, think of being part of a team, not just safety. The last small part of it, in my opinion, is a fairly small part, is the safety segment of that. So we've had already a number of those classes. Starting this week, there are 9 different running right training teams out, and they're doing every coal mine in the organization, every employee. So, I mean, that's going to take a couple of months, but we're shutting down mines and bringing all the employees and doing that. And the second half of that, or the next piece of that, is what I call the loop around, to tie the loop together, where the safety guys and the continuous improvement coordinators and others and operational people are going back to the mines where they've had the training and are going back to reinforce it in the mine, at the mine site, underground, at the face, at the belt drive, trying to drive that so that people can hopefully as a group recognize that this is serious and that this is the way we do business on a routine, everyday basis, not a go to the class, you saw my wink, you saw my nod, you know what I really want, versus this is what I really want. And that's just part of the process. And then obviously we're doing what I call nuts and bolts training, where you're going through supervisors, teaching them how to examine and do things on the basis of saying, here's some, we want you to have the cultural tools, but you have to have some systems tools too. You got to recognize what you're supposed to do. So all that's going on, and I will tell you that having gone through it with the foundation and Alpha merger of almost 2 years ago, those cultures we made, we presumed that the cultures were the same. They are. They're doing the right thing is embedded in both of their cultures. Employee involvement is in both cultures. You still find that it's harder to do. And you know, I'm a guy of anecdotes. I'll use one. And unfortunately, October, we had a fatal accident at one of our mines. And the head of that mine made a comment, and it gets back to what Tom had said in his presentation. He used the phrase wary, be wary. We use the phrase vulnerable. And he said, we had been so good for so long. I listened to all the running right talk. I did all that. He came out of the foundation group. I did all that, and we were doing the program, but we weren't living the program. In other words, I knew I had to do this program because you expected it. I wasn't doing it because it was in here. And he said, and that's, I've got to change. And hopefully we can make our cultural change without that happening again. But I don't know if that answers your question, but those are all the processes that are ongoing now. And in the meantime, you're trying to do your day job. So that's part of the process. I'll give Tony, since he's had 16 hours to figure out what he's doing.
2 days and 2 weeks.
You've been thinking about it a little bit longer. I think the first thing that's critical is for senior leadership at Arch to convey their expectations. We have a 3-pronged set of values. They involve safety and environmental excellence and returning shareholder value. And our CEO, Steve Lear, is very effective at communicating how important those are to the company. And those communications have already started. The second important thing is the early organizational structure with the ICG operations will include a mixture of senior ICG executives and Arch executives. So we're intermingling the two leadership structures so that we get the benefit of both. Third, I think that we've got a couple of advantages. Prior to my coming to Arch, I worked with a company that had a number of these operations, so I'm familiar with what they do, and they're a little familiar with some of the stuff that we do. There's also a core group of these mines that come from the shell mining tradition, and when they were started up, they had a very, very solid safety foundation that was put in place. So those are all positives. I think the attitude that we have to have going in is one of going in and looking for what they're doing right, as much as what we can share with them. So I think we have to very much avoid being arrogant in the approach that we take, and recognize that we're going to find a lot that's good at these operations. From a practical standpoint, what I'll be charged with over the next 3 to 6 months is to get out and meet with these operations, share the protocols, policies, things that we've put in place in Arch over the years, and offer assistance to them to adopt some of those measures. And then the final part of our strategy has to do with migrating behavior-based safety over there. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do that with a group of 10 of our BBS specialists that are being trained as advanced facilitators. They'll be working under a coach, and we'll be assigning 2 per operation. We're going to target 5 operations to start with, and go through the process. And we expect that good things are going to happen.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment on how to integrate safety when you have these mergers?
Yeah.
Yeah, Mike.
We went through this a few years ago with the integration of Cemex and Rinker. And, I mean, what we did is we looked back at those milestones at scale. We assessed, I mean, literally down to every district and sometimes standalone plants where they were in that progression, and then tailored the, safety approach to their stage of development. We did have, one of my predecessors, he tried to just say, okay, we're going to throw all of the training at them at once, and we're going to immediately take them from the bottom to near the top in one step. And it was just immensely frustrating for everybody that was involved in that. And they didn't make any progress. They put a lot of time and energy into it, and it was just a bad experience. And we changed the approach, and it worked great.
Okay, thank you. I have a question here from the audience, and a larger question. And this has to do with production. And ultimately we are in the business of production, productivity, and meeting the stockholders' objectives and goals. Otherwise, we won't be in the business. And therefore, this question is very relevant to that fact. If there is a production-based bonus plans, does it compromise safety? That's a question from the audience. And the larger question is, do you think that a supervisor's main focus really is safety, or do you think that the pressure to meet production goals and the pressure flows over to the members of his crew or her crew?
I'll start since I ended up with the microphone last time. The answer to both of those is absolutely not, because those questions pre-assume that there is some conflict between productivity and performance, and I think it's completely the opposite. You either do well in both, or you're not doing either one correctly.
I think it's a great litmus test for the quality of the culture, and those cultures in which you have that positive, strong focus on safety and integration. What Mike just said is absolutely true. For those in which it's weak and negative, I think there is a draw, a strain, a stress, a pressure there to try to accommodate those 2 points of view. And therein lies the motivation for wanting to go from one to the other.
Tom, go ahead, Tony. Sorry.
I just say from our experience, we spend a lot of time on safety-related activities, people conducting observations, people going to different sites, visiting, and at the end of the day, I think that time spent has made us more efficient. What we're doing is about trying to do the right thing. Whether it's executing a production plan or a safety plan, it's about trying to execute your management system in the right way. And when you approach it in that manner, both safety and productivity come out on the plus side.
Yeah, we talk about safe production rather than safety and production, or production and safety in any order. Doesn't make sense unless it is safe production. And that's, let me ask Tom a question from the audience here. What did you use as leading indicators of your operations safety effectiveness?
Well, different ones in different organizations, but if you're looking for a good list, percentage implementation of your management system, percentage change in a positive direction for responses on perception survey, percentage of your leadership core that's gone through leadership development, percentage of near misses that require root cause analysis are getting root cause analysis, percentage of incidents that, as judged by the safety and health professionals, who I think are best positioned to make this judgment, are not recurrences from previous years, usually 12 to 36 months. A long list there. There's probably hundreds of others, but those are a few good ones. Guys, I'm sure there's others who want to add.
Okay.
Both the scope and the depth of participation in a safety observation program, and again, the results that you see on that is, you may have even said that or something close to it, but I think that's.
I would just follow up what Michael said, that when you look at our EIG and PG meetings, A, the number of people involved, B, the type of rollouts you're getting, things thought about, things done, I think that's a leading indicator to me as to whether we're getting the involvement we want. And then finally, trying to stay away from measuring a card count and looking at the quality of what you're seeing and what trends you have in, and what are you doing about it? Do you have a plan in place to make those corrections, or are you just taking the simplest way out? Sorry, Tom.
A number of safety codes out there was presented in Gary Research, one of the view graphs, ANSI, AIHA, Z10, ISO 9001, ISO 18001. I have looked at some of these, and I've also looked at the American Petroleum Institute's RP75, and I think the panel has a lot of experience on safety culture and safety management systems and actually managing large industrial projects. And therefore, my question is, what are the experiences of the panel member with any of these standards, and how can they be useful for mining companies?
That's why I hand it to you, Tom.
I'll go right and left after this. Well, I think the two that I would pay attention to most immediately is ANSI Z10 and OS 18001. ANSI Z10 is the only American national consensus standard for health and safety management. It was a consensus process that involved representatives across industry, representatives from labor. There was input from government and pseudo-government organizations, and it is designed to allow any size organization to put a management system in place regardless of the industry. If you haven't taken the time to take a look at it and read it, strongly suggest you do. The overall structure is very simple and basic, but it really gets you started on this idea of how to go from something other than a system to a true management system. OSAS 18001 is more of an international standard, and there are some differences in terms of what's emphasized, particularly around the area of leadership and culture, ironically enough, as we talked about today. 18001 is probably the most widely implemented management system in the world and industry in terms of safety and health, broadly across the world. And in fact, there are a number of multinational corporations in the U.S. who use that because it's easier for them on a global basis to implement that than doing ANSI and taking ANSI outside the U.S. Ironically enough, very good system, take it somewhere else outside the U.S. and you can get some pushback simply because it's American. Go figure. But systems thinking, and we talked a little bit about that today, I think is something that as an industry we probably need to do more of. This notion of not looking at things that are programmatic, which is the traditional menu we have because we've been accustomed to a regulatory framework through the Department of Labor for a long time. But systems thinking is different, and in many ways it can be much more effective. It just takes a slightly different perspective, slightly different application of resources, but can have a very powerful impact in terms of the results that you get, the return on investment.
Any further comments? Any questions for the panel from the audience?
That's why I handed,
Me too.
that's why I handed Tom the microphone.
Any, you want to?
We were just making a joke.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
I would just say one thing, is that many times, in my experience, when you're trying to implement these management systems, it really depends on the maturity of your company. And what I mean by that is, especially in the aggregate industry, you have an awful lot of companies that are purchasing mom and pop organizations. These mom and pop organizations are generally started, again, in the aggregate industry by someone with a loader that goes out and starts digging a bank. And I say their maturity level is very low on the business aspect of things. So therefore, as you get larger in a company, you start bringing in higher level professionals. That's when you start getting into the management systems. So from my experience, it's difficult implementing management systems, whether it's an ISO or just the plan, do, check, act part of a management system, until you get that buy-in, until you get that maturity level elevated a bit. That's just been from my experience.
Tony, there was one specific question to you, and this has to do with your, if I remember right, Alpha uses a card in which the employee puts down either a practice or something that was not right. And the question for you, Tony, was how do you get employees to report near misses without fear of reprimand? Is this an anonymous program?
Well, we do it by trying to be creative. It's not easy to have somebody come forward and admit that they've made a mistake. So one of the techniques we've done is we've come up with acronyms. At our Mountain Laurel mine, they call a near miss a lucky dog. At the Colmac operation, they call it a mulligan. And they try to do promotional activities around those by using the campaign. The only way you establish that you're not going to punish people for coming forward is through time, by having people come forward and showing that they're not going to be punished for coming forth with the information. And over time, once people get that comfort level, it becomes more and more frequent. We've seen a pretty big increase in all of our operations on lucky dogs and mulligans, and at Sufco they call them lucky swimmers. We also create, that's one of our upstream targets we ask the operations to establish. So in addition to observation rate and observation quality, one of their upstream targets are near-miss reports, and that encourages the behavior-based teams to come up with ways to promote that.
hard to do, and I think we talked about it previously. The trick is to ensure that you've got focus on being a just culture. That people know they won't get beat up if you report. You have to suspend discipline, except if you have absolutely critical rules. For example, if you are going to turn in a near miss on lockout and tagout, and you're doing it because that might give you an opportunity to use it as a chicken exit, then you have to be able to establish up front whether or not you're willing to accept that as a company. You may want to say, under no conditions can we not apply discipline for that, because that's purely life-threatening. Therefore, understand if you turn those near misses in, we'd rather not have that data and live with the certainty of applying appropriate discipline, so people will know the boundaries of acceptable behavior in our organization. If you suspend it completely, sometimes that can lead to anarchy. So that's a delicate question.
One other way that we found successful is when you have key people in your management group that come forward and self-report near misses. That's a very positive example that it's something acceptable to do.
You bet. Great idea.
I understand that the airline pilots, when they make a mistake while they are flying, it is automatically recorded. The only question is whether it is reported by the pilot, because he is supposed to report it, he or she is supposed to report it. And if the report is not in by a certain amount of time, you know that the pilot has not reported an unsafe practice or an unsafe procedure or an unsafe operation that happened. Can you envision something like this happening in mining?
Well, I would hope we wouldn't have those type of experiences that would require reporting.
Because the point that was made was that the system is so technically advanced that everything that happens in the system is being recorded somewhere in some tower.
I don't know anybody who's actually done this, but I know people have discussed it as a very advanced state of both culture and system maturity, that they could install video cameras in their operations and record 24 hours a day and audit those randomly, looking for both unsafe behaviors and near-miss incidents and other things, and that the culture would support that by virtue of having employees both involved in the random selection of that and the analysis. Now, I don't know anybody who's actually done it, but it's a very intriguing idea that you could actually do that.
I've actually got that in my block plants. We've got DVRs on all the plant sites, and a lot of in the ready mix business, a lot of our delivery trucks have a device called DriveCam. It sits on the front of the truck, and anytime that there's an accelerometer in there that triggers a recording event, but anytime that accelerometer goes off, it clips a 12-second video of whatever happened a few seconds before and a few seconds after. And it is an absolutely outstanding improvement tool if you actually review the videos and follow up on the driver counseling.
Okay. Any further questions? We'd like to thank the panel for not only presenting papers, but taking time to answer these questions, and thank you very much. I'm going to take about, I think, any questions for the panel? If not, we will take about 5 minutes to present some concluding remarks. And I really ask the audience to give a big hand to our speakers for their ready acceptance of Penn State invitation to present their experiences in our seminar and for their excellent presentations. I will also request you to give a hand to our sponsors, without whom we really could not organize seminars of this type. Please give a hand to our sponsors, and they are Mine Safety and Health Administration, Pennsylvania Bureau of Mine Safety, Alpha Natural Resources, Cool Spring, Stone Supply, Genmark Corporation, Lehigh Hanson, and Industrial Scientific Corporation. I want to thank the exhibitors for showing up and presenting some materials for us. I want to thank the Penn State team, Mark, Joe, Bill, and Larry for their inputs in the planning and organizing of this symposium. I want to let the speakers know if they thought I chased them, these people didn't escape my chase either. They had as many emails from me as the speakers had with regard to the various aspects. So would you please give a thanks to our Penn State team? And then I want to thank you, audience, for sticking through from around 7 o'clock in the morning to up this point in time. You remember, if I stated in the very beginning that we had two objectives. One was to develop an understanding of the terms culture, safety culture, and culture change, and then to develop an understanding of the processes and practices involved in applying the tools and techniques and methods of culture change in mining companies. I hope we have been able to achieve that in a limited manner or in an extensive manner, depending upon how you feel, where you start and where you end. But I certainly will hope that presentations by Kyle and Tom and our other speakers presented and introduced the subject of culture change and where we are, and our leaders from industry, Tony and John and others, Mark here, presented a state of where they are with their applications and what results they are achieving. And certainly the NIAR's presentation gave you an idea of how this subject is being researched and what are some of the things they are looking at. And they are going to present you a comparison of performances at the various mines, and this will be a very useful information. In addition to finding out what are some of the current state of affairs, the recommendations that they provide to the various mining companies, somewhere along the line, if they can be in some form or other presented as recommendations to the general industry without any identification, it will be very, very useful. And let me say a couple of things. There were a lot of pairs of words used today. We talked about behavior and belief, individual and group, norms and values, training and learning, reactive and proactive, complexity and chaos, leadership and change, measurable and actionable, day-to-day process and long-term issues. So we can see that when we talk about culture change or safety culture in mining, there are a lot of things that go together, and a lot of these things appear to be interrelated. I at one time thought I went in circles looking for what is the definition of culture. Oh, culture is a reflection of personality. What's the definition of personality? Personality is a reflection of attitude. What is attitude? Attitude is a reflection of personality. All of a sudden you found there were a lot of words used which had very close association with each other, which just goes to point out that culture encompasses a very large number of things, and that's what you heard today. A large number of attitudes, behaviors, values, judgment, worker, management, short-term issues, long-term issues, issues that can be corrected immediately, issues that takes a lot more commitment of time and funds. And I hope that this seminar we have started, it will continue to receive support for holding it in subsequent years. Thank you very much for attending.